According to Mark Twain, there are two Americas, the one we live in and the one we look to. There is no reason why the Heisman Trophy has grown mythic. There's no simple reason why the winners of the Heisman Trophy have risen to a status far higher than ordinary MVPs. They are more than just athletes. They are Americans that we look to. He said the same words every year on the first day of preseason. He'd gather his team together and hold a football up in the air. "What is this?" John Heisman would ask, holding the ball aloft. "It is a prolate spheroid, an elongated sphere in which the outer leather casing is drawn tightly over a somewhat smaller rubber tubing. Better to have died as a small boy than to fumble this football."
John Heisman at the turn of the century was one of the pioneer coaches. It was one of the coaches that revolutionized the game by putting the safety factors into it where it was a brute force game. And he was a successful coach, especially at Georgia Tech, where they won a couple of national championships.
Amos Alonzo Stagg may have been more instrumental to the game's development, but it is appropriate that a trophy possessing such a mystic appeal bears the name of a man as complex as John Heisman. On one hand, Heisman insisted upon fair play and teamwork. He would preach to his boys, "Don't cuss, don't argue with the officials." Yet he also oversaw the most unfair game in football history, the most hellacious humiliation of them all.
Cumberland College is in Nashville, and it's not any bigger than this room. I mean, it's a little small place. Well, John Heisman he was a great coach wherever he went. He just happened to pound on poor little Cumberland, which shouldn't have played that game anyway.
Heisman's Georgia Tech squad ran up a score of 120-0 by halftime, and his halftime speech showed no mercy. "Men were in front," said Heisman, "but you never know what those Cumberland players have up their sleeves. So in the second half, go out and hit them clean and hit them hard. Do not let up." The final score was 222-0.
I don't think that went 4 quarters either. I think their average per carry was minus 10 yards or something like that.
Heisman was merciless. Yet he also invented the center snap for the sole purpose of making the game safer and more organized at the line of scrimmage. It is fitting that this man of infinite contradictions objected to the creation of the trophy named for himself.
John Heisman was actually against the award. Being a college coach at that time, he just felt that you couldn't signify one player as the outstanding player. But he relented, gave his blessing on the award, and the club in his memory named it the John W. Heisman Memorial Trophy Award.
John Heisman's contradictions are the essence of the game of football. Play fair, but tear their heads off. The winners of the Heisman Trophy, taken individually, each of them carries with him at his core a set of contradictions similar to John Heisman's. Each of them in his own way is the prototypical football man. Yet each could not be more different from the others. The workhorse, the ego, the scholar, the brothers in arms, the golden boy, the hometown hero, and the saint. These men comprise a fraternity as sacred as the game itself. They are Heisman winners.
I guess Ernie was that type of person. Strangers would tell Ernie their problems. They would just stop him, and I would say, "What are you doing? You know that guy?" "No, I don't know that guy." "What are you doing talking to him?" "Well, he said you got a problem." "Well, what did he tell you?" "I can't tell you. He got a problem." That's the type of person he was. To me, I thought that he was a God sent for some reason. And we always had the fear that he was too good to be here. When we were young, we'd always just say that. He's just too good to be here, because he was too good to believe.
Ernest R. Davis was born in 1939. He grew up in Elmira, New York, and before he was 10 years old, the town began to whisper about the incredible boy growing in their midst. In one of his first games, Ernie had an easy opportunity to sack the opposing quarterback. Instead of knocking him to the ground, Ernie simply picked him up in the air, holding him aloft until the whistle blew.
Ernie was much larger than most of the kids we played with, and it was like he was so dominant. He did what he wanted, when he wanted, anytime he wanted. That's how powerful he was. He was a gentle giant and gifted, very gifted. Terribly concerned about other folk.
Well, now you know, all mothers think their child is special, but I thought he was just to me, he was just an average, caring young man.
Upstate New York had never seen an athlete like Ernie Davis. As an all-state basketball player, Davis's teams won 52 straight games, setting a state record. As a running back, there was simply no way for a high school defense to stop him. But the recruiter who captured Davis's heart was none other than Jim Brown, who summoned Davis personally for a visit.
I felt that he could make a major difference at Syracuse and that he had the talent to do anything he wanted to do. And I felt the ground had been broken so he wouldn't have to go through the same things I went through up there.
But Ernie went to meet him and came back from Syracuse and told us about Jim Brown. And the way he talked about Jim Brown, we knew that at that time Ernie was going to Syracuse, because Jim Brown had made a terrible impression on him.
Brown, who had just graduated, asked Davis to wear his own number 44. Davis was overwhelmed. He proceeded to shatter his idol's records.
Ernie Davis sparked the Syracuse team with runs such as this one. That number 44 was murder to the opposition.
In only his sophomore year, Davis led the Orange Band to their first and only undefeated national championship season. He averaged a stunning 7 yards per carry and iced the national title with a brilliant 85-yard touchdown against Texas in the Cotton Bowl.
Davis is going to go all the way. He's the 15 to 10. Touchdown!
And yet, as astonishing as Davis was on the field, it is not his athletic achievements that his peers recall first. It is Ernie Davis's character that leaps immediately to mind.
My wife, I met her here at Syracuse, and she asked me if I would take her out, and I told her yes, but then I didn't really mean it. And when Ernie found out, Ernie said to me, he says, "How can you make a promise and not keep it?" I said, "I don't have any money, I don't have a car." I said, "How am I gonna take her out?" He said, "Here's $5, you can drive my car, wear my sweater." And we've been married 35 years. Ernie was special.
He was a great human being, a man that transcended everything, really. A lot of people loved him.
He must have been just a powerful, powerful person in the sense that he was understated, yet he was regal. There was something regal about him.
Davis was incandescent. He inspired his teammates and professors. He was a diligent churchgoer. And in December 1961, Ernie Davis became the first black man ever to win the Heisman Trophy.
Ernie Davis of Syracuse is voted the Heisman Trophy as the outstanding college football player of the year.
That same day, he met the President of the United States at John F. Kennedy's request.
If someone could walk around with an invisible halo above their head, I bet he was Ernie Davis. And he's one of our great tragic figures.
The only flaw to be seen in this magnificent young athlete was that he was made of flesh and blood. Unbeknownst to him, his blood had begun to betray him.
I'd never had any indication while we were rooming together that he was sick. And based on his performance on the field, there was no way that anyone would ever believe he was sick.
I didn't know he was sick. And he slept on the floor. And I said, why are you sleeping on the floor? He said, I got a terrible pain in my back. He said, but if you ever tell anyone, I'm going to deny it. I said, why can't you tell him you got a pain in your back? You're hurting. He said, no. He said, I'm not supposed to hurt. I said, you are. You're human. He said, no, I'm not supposed to hurt. He said, so I won't ever tell anyone.
Ernie Davis had contracted acute monocytic leukemia, the most severe form of the deadly disease.
His nose would be bleeding. He just put some cotton up to cover it up and never complained about anything. And he knew, I guess he was going to die real soon.
We drove up to Cleveland Hospital. There were about 4 of us coaches, Pirro and Bell and Schwartzy and myself. We went into the hospital. We couldn't believe it. I mean, it was unbelievable to see him like that.
Davis was predictably upbeat in front of his teammates and coaches. After a 3-hour visit, they turned to leave. Davis stopped them at the door. Please don't go, he said. This will be the last time I'll ever see you.
I saw Ernie, I think, 2 weeks before he passed. And we were walking down the street. And a little boy came up to me and said, you're Ernie Davis, you're gonna die. And Ernie said, well, we all are gonna die sometime. But I have lived a complete life, and I have done a lot of things that people my age will never do. He said, I've helped so many folk along my way. Maybe it's time for me to go. He said, and I feel now that I can do no more. And I said, well, what did you do? He said, you won't know about it until I'm gone.
Ernie Davis died on May 18th, 1963. His life on Earth lasted less than 25 years.
I just realized what he was talking about. Imagine, all this years after his death, he's still doing good. People still writing stories about him. People still using him as a benchmark for character. And I don't think he could have obtained it if he lived. He couldn't have lived up to the standard. There's no way he could have lived up to his expectations. No way. And I think he knew that and understood that long before we did.
Well, I think the mention of Archie Griffin's name is almost one of reverence to most people that follow Ohio State football very closely. He was just a remarkably gifted little football player. I say little, he was little. He's possibly 5'9", and that might be stretching it a little bit.
We look up to Archie, and we look down at Archie because he's a little shorter than we are.
In 1972, a freshman running back named Archie Griffin walked into the Ohio State locker room, took off his shoes, and was measured at 5'7" and 3/4 inches. His feet went on to record 2 other notable achievements. First, they ran all the way to 2 Heisman trophies, the only man ever to win it twice. And the next thing his feet did might have been even more impressive. They stayed put.
What's great about Archie Griffin is that he's still at Ohio State. He was a man that was meant to go to a school and become a hero in that school, then a part of that school for life. There aren't many people like that.
He was born at the Ohio State University Hospital, of course. And even then, he was small. He resolved to get bigger. He bench-pressed cardboard boxes filled with dirt, tied to the ends of a broomstick.
In the recruiting process, there were a lot of people who told me that, maybe I was too small to go to Ohio State and that I should go to a school where guys were more or less my size and that I'd get a pretty good opportunity to play. Being an athlete, I felt I knew my abilities better than anyone, so I took it as a challenge to attend Ohio State.
The head coach of Ohio State at the time was the great and powerful Wayne Woodrow Woody Hayes. Griffin had heard rumors that the coach was racially prejudiced. Griffin was assured by black alumni that Hayes was tough but fair. Nonetheless, when Griffin's freshman season began, he rode the far end of the bench.
Coach Hayes used to always tell his coaches or even players that if you really believe in something, if you believe hard enough in something, you got to pound the table. And I understand that Rudy Hubbard, my backfield coach, pounded the table for me. And that gave me the opportunity to get into the game.
Ohio State's second game of the year was a home game against North Carolina. Midway through the first quarter, Hubbard pleaded with Hayes over the coaching phones to put Griffin into the game. Hayes relented. Griffin posted nothing less than the most memorable debut in Big Ten history. He ran for 239 yards, smashing Ohio State's single-game rushing record.
I prayed the night before the game to get into the game, and I got into the game. So it was a miracle in my life.
The entire state of Ohio immediately fell for Archie Griffin. During his 4 years, the Buckeyes never lost a home game and played in the Rose Bowl each year. Even the imperious Hayes grew a soft spot for Griffin.
Woody absolutely worshipped Archie Griffin. Woody could raise all kinds of living thunder, and did, with probably 99% of his other players, but I don't think I ever heard him really rant and rave and get upset with Archie.
Hayes would later quote Duke Ellington, "If you want your music to come out just right, you got to use both your black keys and your white keys." Even though Griffin dominated the Heisman voting his junior year, he was overwhelmed when his name was called.
That was very special for me, extremely emotional for me. Being a junior, to win it that year was very special.
He returned for his senior season and played hurt most of the year. Nonetheless, his final campaign capped off an astonishing career as he became the first back in history to top 5,000 rushing yards. Given the modern penchant for leaving school early, Griffin's back-to-back Heisman Awards is a feat that may never be repeated.
Look what he's gone on to do now. He had a decent pro career, and now he's Associate Athletic Director at Ohio State, his alma mater, and he loves it, and I could see the day he'll be the athletic director. But very, very wonderful person.
Archie does one thing that is characteristic of the great people. Archie pays back.
I just like the idea that he's still at Ohio State. That he's not working for some steel company or, you know what I mean? Or he's a scout for the Philadelphia Eagles. He's at Ohio State. He is Ohio State. He's Mr. Ohio State. Sorry, Woody. He's Mr. Ohio State.
How does the Heisman Trophy affect the lives of men who've won it? Is the trophy an indicator of a great life yet to come? Or does it represent the peak of a man's life? The lives of the first two Heisman winners, Jay Berwinger and Larry Kelly, provide a study in contrast. Jay Berwinger grew up in working-class Dubuque, Iowa. For Berwinger and many of his high school classmates, a college education represented an expensive, unattainable dream. But Berwinger's athletic ability cracked open a door.
I found out while I was in school there that if I had the grades and if I was an athlete, I could get a scholarship and get to to get an education. Well, those were Depression days, and that was an important thing.
And to think that he went to the University of Chicago, which might be harder to get into than Stanford.
Almost half of the freshmen in Berwanger's class flunked out. Berwanger studied intently, maintaining a C average. He would tell a friend, "I worked like hell for those C's." At exactly the same time, in New Haven, Connecticut, the best player on a great Yale football team did not need to study at all. He had 140 IQ. He was the iconic Larry Kelly, and he was so good-looking that his classmates would literally stop and stare.
Walking around campus, I think people would come up to him, and I think it sometimes embarrassed him, but I think sometimes it also made him feel very good that he was that well known.
And before he turned 20, national sports writers were writing poems about him.
Had a wit about him that was typical Yale, but probably a little bit more in a bragging style than maybe Yale would have appreciated. But he had a great wit, and it never fazed him to say anything. An official came over to get the ball from Kelly. Kelly had just finished the play, he got the ball, and he went over to get it, and he says, "What do you want me to do, sign it for you?" And the official said something. He says, "Well, I don't know." He says, "Everybody else wants me to sign stuff for him."
By his senior year, even though his University of Chicago team was terrible, Jay Berwanger had evolved into an unstoppable player.
They didn't have a winning record, but he was just a one-man gang. And he made some of the greatest runs that nobody ever saw because there was no television back then.
What a performer. A one-man army. In his last game, he outgained Illinois' entire offense in rushing. Scored the only touchdown and kicked the PAT. And the headline on the paper was Berwanger 7, Illini 6.
Berwanger went on to graduate with his class, but not before he received a nondescript telegram from New York City.
I received a wire from the Downtown Athletic Club saying that I'd won the trophy, and they were sending me 2 tickets to fly to New York, one for me and one for my coach. Well, my biggest thrill at that moment was it was going to be my first airplane ride.
The Heisman meant nothing to him. He used it as a doorstop.
But winning the Heisman meant everything to Larry Kelly, who won it the year after Berwanger. Years later, Kelly would say, "We Heisman winners look at ourselves as immortal."
Larry felt it to be very, very important to him. It signified his life. It verified everything he's done.
Kelly was deluged with career opportunities. He turned down the NFL, claiming that it did not have a good reputation. He turned down baseball's St. Louis Cardinals, deriding the Gas House Gang for being hillbillies. Kelly even rejected an offer that seemed perfect for him, to act in a Hollywood movie. Later, he confessed his reason: fear. "I didn't think I could do it," he said. Instead, Larry Kelly returned to his cloistered prep school, Petty, to coach football and to teach.
It's not that unusual for athletes to peak in college who never again accomplished anything so great as they did on the football field.
In 1996, 81-year-old Larry Kelly wrote a letter to his old high school principal, promising him that he would give them his Heisman Trophy. The principal bought a glass case to prepare a small shrine. But Kelly never sent the trophy. Soon after, Kelly sold it at auction to a sports bar in suburban New York. Kelly claimed that he wanted to give the money to his grandnieces and grandnephews.
Jay Berwanger was the very first player taken in the very first National Football League draft by the Bears, the monsters of the Midway. Berwanger turned it down and became a millionaire businessman.
Sticking to the same work ethic that brought him such success as a football player, Jay Berwanger made millions in the rubber and plastic business. In July 2000, Larry Kelly's fourth wife walked down the steps to their basement and discovered that her husband had killed himself at the age of 85. Some years ago, at a friend's insistence, Berwanger picked up his old doorstop and donated it to the University of Chicago. It remains there still. There is a special place in the annals of college football history for Army and its arch rival, the United States Naval Academy. Over the years, the two service academies have produced great teams, great players, and Heisman winners like 1958 winner Pete Dawkins, Joe Bellino, who won in 1960, and Navy hero Roger Staubach in 1963. But this is a story about the Academy's two most famous players, Doc Blanchard and Glenn Davis.
You know, whenever there's a war, which fortunately isn't too often, they get the best football players at Army and Navy. They can go out and recruit them, they can promise them a commission, they can promise them they get to finish college before they have to go to war.
In the fall of 1944, the world was at war, with the Allies and the Axis powers engaged in some of the fiercest, bloodiest battles in history. And in Southern California, a high school running back named Glenn Davis was dazzling scouts like no player before him. Recruiters fell over each other to sign Davis, but West Point offered him something no other school could, a guarantee that the only battle he would see for the next 4 years would be on the athletic field. Army landed the greatest all-round athlete in Academy history.
Davis, the speed boy, gives the fans a thrill as he displays his open field running ability.
He was just a natural. Nobody could catch him. If he got out in the open, he was flat out gone. This was a guy who would go over and run 9.7 in the 100-yard dash, win the event, then go over and play for the Army, or maybe even pitch for the Army baseball team.
Glenn Davis was not the only superstar that Army landed that fall. A massive running back named Blanchard transferred in after a brilliant freshman year at the University of North Carolina. Blanchard hadn't wanted to transfer, mind you. He was drafted by the United States Army. Curiously, his first military assignment wasn't in the Pacific Theater or Europe, but rather on the gridiron next to Davis.
The Army would load up with all these college football players, you know, because they were now, quote, in the military. They could play for West Point.
On the field, Blanchard was a man of iron. He punished those who stood in his path. His shattering power provided the perfect complement to Davis's speed. And Mr. Inside and Mr. Outside were christened.
It's Davis getting the ball. Watch the field running of Mr. Outside.
With an unstoppable backfield, Army pulverized its opponents. During the 1944 season, they outscored their opposition by an average score of 56-4. And the Cadets were back-to-back undefeated national champions. In 1945, Blanchard won the Heisman Trophy.
All the other schools around the country were affected by the war. They were depleted of talent because most college football players were often, you know, fighting Japan or fighting the Fuhrer.
In 1946, their senior year, a new challenge emerged. The war was over, and the Army's opposition had returned to full strength.
Army coach Red Blake, wearing his good luck red tie for the first time this season, admits it's going to be a tough one.
Yet Blanchard and Davis maintained their dominance, and Army went unbeaten for a third consecutive season. Davis, in particular, was brilliant in 1946, it would be his turn to win the Heisman.
We salute Heisman Trophy winner Glenn Davis, college football's Player of the Year.
Blanchard and Davis graduated in 1946.
Football history closes as Doc Blanchard receives his diploma from General Taylor, superintendent of the academy. The other football immortal, Glenn Davis, becomes Lieutenant Davis, and again the cheers ring in his ears.
Davis and Blanchard playing for Army, you couldn't beat it. It didn't make any difference whether you went to one of the academies or not. It was the game you had to watch. Today, it is much more the game of the people who've been in the Army or the Navy. But, you know, if we were to slip into another war, they'd be the powers again.
Some believe that the Notre Dame quarterback, no matter who he is an automatic favorite for the Heisman Trophy. After Heisman-winning seasons in the 1940s by Angelo Bertelli and Johnny Lujack, Notre Dame quarterbacks were anointed as Heisman favorites before they even took their first snaps of the season. In 1956, Notre Dame quarterback Paul Hornung won the Heisman Trophy in the most controversial vote in the trophy's history. Did he win because he was the most deserving? Was it because of the color of his skin? Or was it simply because of the color of his helmet, which is, after all, designed to catch the eye?
Paul was the golden boy. I mean, he lived the part, he loved the part. It was a perfect marriage, him and Notre Dame.
I was kind of honest. I told everybody how much I enjoyed it. And that reputation grew. The golden boy kind of stuck. It was the perfect kind of a nickname for me, I guess, in those early years.
Notre Dame didn't have women yet. It was an all-men's school. But St. Mary's, the Catholic school down the road, had a lot of women. And a lot of them knew who Hornung was. You know, he was absolutely a ladies' man. One guy told me it was like mice on cheese. When Hornung first came to Notre Dame on a recruiting trip, two of the older players took him around before Hornung met Frank Leahy. And Hornung's first few questions, you know, are where are the bars and where are the women?
But Paul Hornung was even more impressive on the field than he was off. During his junior season, he led Notre Dame in almost every category, on offense and on defense.
We're due with the ball, and that's Mel Dillard carrying the pigskin. Only a fine tackle by Paul Hornung prevents Mel from going all the way.
Paul was the last of the triple threats, the last man who could run and pass and catch passes and kick and do just about everything. Between the 10-yard line and the goal line, he was as good a football player as ever lived.
Nothing is going to slow down the Irish today, and Hornung barrels for the score.
Paul, to me, is the greatest football player ever to play at Notre Dame. I mean, he played defense, he played quarterback, he played fullback, he kicked off, he kicked field goals, he punted.
But while Hornung was among the greatest ever to play at Notre Dame, his team during his senior season was one of the worst.
Gary Myers can't hold the ball, and it lands in the eager hands of Mel Dillard.
For the first time in over 2 decades, the Irish lost their season opener.
SMU upsets the Fighting Irish 19-13.
After winning the following week, they then suffered through an unthinkable 5-game losing streak. And the once mighty Irish were 1-6.
Oklahoma hands Notre Dame its first shutout in 50 games by a 40-0 score.
And even though we were losing, well, he was a terror down on that field. You know, you couldn't stop Paul Hornung. Just a great all-around football player. Too bad he wasn't on a better team.
Hornung, the Louisville, Kentucky thoroughbred, puts it 55 yards for a spectacular touchdown.
There was one rule. When you get the ball inside the 10, give it to your best ball carrier, yourself.
By the season's final week, the Heisman race had tightened. Tailback Johnny Majors had led Tennessee to an undefeated season. Oklahoma halfback Tommy McDonald had never lost a single college game. And at Syracuse, running back Jim Brown had put together one of the finest seasons any running back had ever posted. No black player had ever won the Heisman. Neither had a player on a losing team. Paul Hornung's team was 2-7. Notre Dame had only 1 game left, USC.
Notre Dame has a lot of rivalries, but USC is at the top of the list, there's no question.
Probably at Southern Cal. I think he did everything that humanly possible on a football field.
Notre Dame closed out its season at the Giant Coliseum in Los Angeles against the Trojans of Southern California.
In agony from a dislocated thumb suffered 3 weeks earlier, Horning switched to halfback.
Performing at halfback, Paul Horning lends a hand at hurling the hoghide. He hoists a beauty to Dick Royer. And Royer...
In the first half, the unimaginable happened. Horning dislocated his other thumb. He left the game in massive pain. But with Notre Dame trailing 21-13, Horning returned to the game to receive a crucial kickoff. He caught the ball between his aching thumbs.
Horning hauls in Johnston's boot on the 5 and scats through the Trojans like a cat let loose at a dog show. He breaks into the open at midfield and pulls away from the pack for a 95-yard touchdown that puts the Irish right back up there at 21-20.
But it simply wouldn't have been fitting for Notre Dame to have won the game. USC scored once more to clinch the win, finishing off Notre Dame's season of infamy at 2-8. The Heisman ballots were cast.
I was in class. I can remember it very vividly. I was in class, and I was called out of class. I didn't know why, and I was, usually when you're called out of class, you start thinking, well, what happened to my mom? Is something wrong back home or something like that? So, I said, is everything okay? Is there any... He said, well, everything's fine. He said, there's a telephone right there, and pick it up, and your mom's on the other line, and tell her you won the Heisman Trophy.
The Heisman Trophy voters looked beneath the mountain of defeats and found a gem, the golden boy, Paul Horning.
The voting was the closest in history. McDonald, in fact, received more first-place votes than Horning. And in one of the greatest controversies in sports history, Jim Brown finished 5th.
It was such a gross miscarriage of justice. I love Paul, but he wasn't the football player that Jim Brown was. And Paul should certainly not, when he was playing for a 2-8 Notre Dame team, he did not deserve to get the Heisman Trophy.
I would never have won the Heisman Trophy on the year that I had I not been a Notre Dame quarterback. It was a cinch.
The irony of Paul Horning's Heisman Trophy endures. He did not coast to the trophy, riding the back of Notre Dame's legacy. He did the opposite. During Notre Dame's darkest hour, he carried their faltering legacy on his own back.
Al Kinnick was like the Renaissance man of college football. He went to law school. He was concerned about racial questions at a time when athletes didn't talk about that.
I was given a book about 5 years ago. There's a book out of Kinnick's letters that were put together. And when you read the letters, his correspondences, you could see that this was like a potential presidential candidate down the road, if everything went the way it should go.
January 1939. This letter was written by Kinnick during his junior year at Iowa.
Dear family, you are the recipient of correspondence from a lad whose mind is very much in flux. Constantly I am inquiring, wondering, speculating, and philosophizing about what my future education, if any, should be. Out of such musing and meditation, I've reached the following conclusion. Man should be motivated in finding his place in society by the desire to benefit his fellow man. This idea of working just to make money is all wrong. It seems to me absolutely necessary, and in reality a joy, that a young man starting out in the world should be imbued with the desire to benefit mankind. The world is alive, alert, and dynamic. So must we be.
In his senior season, Kinnick took over as Iowa's starting quarterback. He played every single down, on offense and on defense, 407 straight minutes without leaving the field. Kinnick was responsible for a staggering 82% of Iowa's points and won the 1939 Heisman Trophy. The United States had yet to enter World War II. And in his acceptance speech, Kennick expressed gratitude that he was warring on the gridirons of the Midwest rather than the battlefields of Europe. He again spoke of the war and the role America should play when he delivered his commencement supper address to his graduating classmates on May 29, 1940.
And what now? Where do we go from here? What part are we to play in this dynamic, ever-changing world? Whether we realize it or not, we have lived a rather sheltered life here at the university. Here, our ideals are lauded, appreciated, and protected. But you know and I know that this period of easy idealism is at an end. So let us confidently take courage in what we deem to be right. Injustice, oppression, and war will ultimately bring on their own destruction. Now is the time for these problems to be solved by enlightened thought and understanding.
After graduating, Kennick turned down lucrative offers to play pro football and entered Iowa Law School. As the war escalated in Europe, he found himself reassessing his views on the war. April 25th, 1941.
Dear family, we either must jump in this mess strongly, regardless of the risk, or refuse to take our rightful place in the world. Western civilization and Christianity are at stake. That puts it strongly, but is no exaggeration just the same. Lincoln was a pacifist at heart, but when there was no other alternative, he grabbed the bull by the horns. He threw down the gauntlet and eradicated the evil. We are faced with the same thing, and the longer we wait, the worse it becomes. Those are my sentiments, and they are right.
In September 1941, 3 months before Pearl Harbor, Kennick registered with the Navy Air Corps and began training as a fighter pilot. He trained in Pensacola and waited for the call to battle.
Dear family, by the end of the week, I shall start primary formation flying. Just about the time I get the hang of it, something else will be scheduled. And so it goes, as we are hurried toward the sterner task ahead. Some of the boys may just be living day to day with a fatalism precluding plans for the future. Not I. My imagination goes beyond the war to those blessed days of peace which one day will come again.
On April 24th, 1943, Kennick was about to ship out on the carrier USS Lexington.
Dear family, this task which lies ahead is adventure as well as duty, and I am anxious to get at it. Our home and family life has been grand and fruitful, and it will be even better after this war is over. Truly, we have shared to the full love, life, and laughter. Comforted in the knowledge that your thought and prayers go with us every minute, and sure that your faith and courage will never falter no matter the outcome. I bid you au revoir.
The following telegram was written by Lieutenant Commander Paul Buey, June 6, 1943.
My dear Mr. and Mrs. Kennick, it is with deepest regret and sympathy that I inform you of the loss of your son Niall in an airplane crash on the 2nd of June, 1943. Niall was engaged in a practice flight that took off from the USS Lexington about 8:30 in the morning. His plane developed a serious oil leak about 10 minutes before he landed. Having lost all oil, the engine failed, forcing Niall to land in the water. His loss was a terrible blow to all of us, and a serious loss to the country he so ably served.
According to eyewitnesses on the Lexington that morning, several sailors dashed out onto the runway just as Kennick's plane approached. Kennick veered away into the water rather than jeopardize the lives of his crewmates on the deck.